Good evening and welcome to the September 23rd Maplewood City Council meeting tonight. I wanted to start off with kind of a description of a fun event that happened in our city that many people may not know about. And I think our council will definitely be interested in it. Back in March or April, the council was asked to approve a new banquet hall in our city. Do you remember that? It's a banquet hall that took over the old Junior Achievement Building on White Bear Avenue. And it was purchased by the Moa family, and they have now, they're in the process of their grand opening. And they did have an event there last weekend that I was asked to attend. It was a meeting of the United Lao Council. They had the annual Intercontinental Conference, and it was on peace, freedom, and national reconstruction. I had the pleasure of being able to introduce the Prince Regent of Laos by the name of Prince Sovalong Savang. I practiced that name several times before I did the welcome, and it was it was an all-day event, and I think part of the day on Sunday as well. I got an opportunity to see the Unisam banquet hall. They gave me a really cool badge. I was thinking of putting it on tonight, and I thought it, kind of.
Good mayor badge.
Yeah, it's a pretty big badge, and I got to wear that all Saturday. But we had presentations. We had our two lieutenants, Lieutenant Beardeman and Busak were there. Officer Kong and Officer Zhang were there as well. And all of those present were thrilled to see the presence of our police department there. And they were incredibly welcoming. And it was a very fun event. And I will tell you that there is some web video out there, I'm sure because there were a lot of cameras. They dedicated a cha-cha dance to me as the mayor of Maplewood. I was very honored. And yes, I am dancing, and there's a lot of video of that, I'm sure. So it was a really nice event. It was fun. And from a council perspective, what was really cool is that they came to us with a dream, with a vision of what that building could look like and how it could be an asset to our community. And they worked all summer long, and it is beautiful inside. It is a restaurant and a banquet hall, and I really, as a mayor, it was really one of those fun things that we get to do is we get to see those visions actually become real, and I think it's going to be a great asset to our community. So it was just an awful lot of fun. So welcome to the MUAs and the new Unisam Banquet Hall, and there. So with that, let us do our Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. City Clerk Sint, would you do our roll call for us, please?
Councilmember Neblett?
Here.
Councilmember Smith?
Here.
Councilmember Knutson?
Here.
Mayor Abrams?
Here.
And Councilmember Juneman is not joining us tonight.
Thank you. Moving on to the approval of our agenda. Do I have a motion for the agenda?
So move.
Second.
Further discussion, I've already spoken with City Manager Coleman, and she has two changes that she'd like to propose to our agenda.
Thank you, Mayor Abrams. The first item that I'd like to point out is item J2, which is a 90-day myth operational action plan report. That was sent to you in your packet on last Wednesday. We are recommending, staff's recommending that we pull that item off of the agenda this evening. We were served on Friday that we are now in litigation with the myth. So it's our recommendation that we note that it is in the packets available for anyone who wants to review the update on how they've done in the last 90 days, but we won't be discussing it this evening. The second item I would like to add under F1, which is my council calendar update. I'd like to also introduce a new member of our senior management team.
We have had a motion and a second, and I take it that motion includes the updated suggestions from the city manager?
It does.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Then the motion passes. Approval of the minutes for the September 9th City Council Workshop minutes.
So moved.
Moved by Neblett, seconded by Smith. He beat you out.
Oh, yeah.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Okay, motion for the approval of the minutes for the City Council meeting minutes for September 9th.
So moved.
Moved by Neblett, seconded by Smith. Motion to approve the September 9th City Council meeting minutes. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Moving on to appointments and presentations. City Manager Coleman.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. First, I'll start with the calendar update. I'm working with the senior management team to look at upcoming workshop schedule. We're firming that up, but for October 14th, we will have a meeting to talk about the organization of our EDA, our Economic Development Authority. And Mr. Beatty, Ms. Paulseth, and myself will be leading that discussion. In addition to that, we just highlight some upcoming community events, and also this is an opportunity for council to bring forward any issues or concerns that they'd have that they'd like staff to look into or work on for them. First of all, on last Saturday, we had the Nature Center 40th anniversary, and the mayor and myself attended that, as well as our Nature Center staff. It was a really great event. We had a really amazing puppet show. It was really fun. We were able to make pressed cider and make little boats out of bamboo that we put in a little kiddie pool and watched them float around. A lot of fun activities. There were scouts there, honor students from our schools. It was a really nice event. Coming up on this Thursday, Starbucks is going to open, yay, right down the street here. So I think we need a new sidewalk that takes a shortcut from City Hall over to that. But we're very excited about that. That open house is 4 to 8. The sidewalk. So we're excited about that, and the people at the Y are really excited about it as well. On the 26th that morning, we also have our Maplewood Business Council, and we'll be hearing from our public safety staff. I believe Public Safety Director Nadeau will be addressing the group. We have the Rec Fun Run on the 28th. Also, on the 28th at 3 p.m., we'll have the Unison Restaurant and Banquet Ribbon Cutting, which the mayor just talked about that new facility, and I hear it's really nice. And so if you could have a chance to stop in there, I think it'd be really good to see them. That's at 1800 White Bear Avenue. We also have a business education series. This is in partnership with our the St. Paul Chamber of Commerce, and that's on benefits other than pay. And that's actually at the Shoreview Community Center. We have our Employee Wellness Fair on October 16th. We have the annual Boo Bash at the Bruin Tup Farm on October 26th. And then you'll see there's also a coffee with a cop. The SWAT team and specialty units, including the K-9, so it'd be really great, on November 12th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. at the MCCY. So that's our community events and our calendar. Now I'd like to just take a moment to introduce our new Assistant City Manager, HR Director, Mike Sable. Mike comes to us with a lot of great experience. He worked at the City of Brooklyn Park for several years as the Assistant City Manager and also the Acting City Manager, and has several years of experience also with Hennepin County. We are really thrilled to have him here. And with that, Mayor, I'd like to just let Mike take a couple minutes and introduce himself to the community and to yourselves.
Assistant City Manager Sable, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor and Council and community. Thank you for the opportunity to serve the city of Maplewood. As City Manager noted, I do have a 20-year history in local government, and I have a real passion for building and strengthening communities. Part of my joy is watching communities, when everybody is unique and everybody brings their own perspective, but we all share a common address and a common goal of building great communities. And I've been fortunate to be able to do that, and I started last Wednesday, and I've had an opportunity to meet with the leadership team and folks, and so the response and the welcome has been tremendous. And I noted today, I actually said, you know, after day 4, it feels like home, and so that is a really great spot to be in a new position. And so I look forward to working with all of you and meeting all of you and serving. And if you have questions, I'll be around after the meeting and you want to say hi, and welcome it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's it then, Mayor.
I forgot to add one thing, but I'm going to do it because then otherwise people will wonder, what is this? Ramsey County has moved forward with home composting, and I just picked mine up this morning. You can pick it up here at City Hall, and this is the compost bucket that you can use. And then it also comes with, I feel like this is show and tell, but it's really very cool. I'm excited to be doing this. There is a starter kit that's included, and so all you have to do is come to City Hall, or you can also, I learned from City Clerk Sint that you can also go to the Ramsey County Library and pick one of these up. If you don't want one of these buckets, but you want the compostable bags, then you can just simply pick those up out at our compost site, which is you can see it, it's in the parking lot of our Y and Community Center. You can pick up replacement bags there. I also checked with the county, and they are moving towards being able to do home pickup, but it's probably going to be several years out, because what they're trying to do is design bags, a blue bag that you would put your compostable material in and just simply close it up, put it in your garbage, and then it would be separated when your garbage picks up. But we aren't there yet, the county isn't there yet, so for now, you can all stop and get one of these, and it's free of charge, so start composting. So, council members, please make sure and get yours. So with that, we're moving on to Leaders in Local Government Award, and this is going to be Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I just want to present and give an update to the council. Last week, on the 12th of September, the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce hosted their annual Leaders in Local Government Awards luncheon. It was attended by, I know, Mayor Abrams and some of us on staff. We were nominated, well, let me back up. So I think what's recognizable is the last time the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce was here to give an update to the council, they did talk about how they're really a chamber that represents the larger metro area. So this was an event that was, amongst the awards categories and nominees, a real geographic spread of different cities within the region that have been doing work that was being recognized by the chamber. We were nominated in the category of planning, land use, and public works for the completion of our North End Vision Plan. And I'm happy to report that we are standing here tonight as the award winners in that category. What, for the community that's here that may not be familiar, the North End Vision Plan is something that came out of our 20-year comprehensive plan to do a kind of a re-envisioning of the future of the Maplewood Mall area, recognizing that that's an area that can see a significant amount of reinvestment, and some of our community goals can be achieved in that important area of the city. So the award recognizes, just from their program, honoring those who exemplify and demonstrate innovation, excellence, and success in local government, and thank the mayor, the council, and the North End Working Group, for, as well as the Planning Commission and the boards, for all of the work that went behind the North End Vision and the success seen from the St. Paul Area Chamber. So,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
I just want to call out staff and Michael Martin in particular, and our residents and our business folks that showed up time and time again to work on that North End Vision Plan. It was so nice to be at that luncheon and to have our city recognized amongst, like Mr. Thompson said, a wide variety of cities of a really large, geographical area, but to have our work recognized as being something terribly unique and wonderful. And there were lots of questions about how did you do it and what did you do and what was the result. And it really was wonderful to have staff and our residents' hard work, and our commissioners as well, recognized for the hard work that they did on the North End. So thank you very much. And it's really kind of a nice little award too. And yeah. And where will that be?
It'll be, I think I heard today that they're planning a display here in the City Hall area for the display of the other awards that the city has received.
Very nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we have then, moving on to resolution for commissioner reappointments. City Manager Coleman.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the commission. Tonight, the council needs to look at the list of commissioners whose terms are going to expire next Monday. The commissioners were asked to fill out an assessment to evaluate their time on the commission and to provide input to the council. Those commissioners approved for appointment will serve a 3-year term ending September 30th of 2022. So there are 5 commissioners whose terms will expire, and they are all seeking reappointment. And I think all of these folks have really donated a lot of their time and energy to the commissions. First, we have the Environmental and Natural Resource Commission. We have Candace Okeson, Ann Paulzer, and Ted Redmond. They are relatively new members, but they've been really, I think, an asset to our community. The Housing and Economic Development Commission, Mark Jenkins, who is currently the chair, and Joy Tachek are both seeking reappointment. And I hope that, council, you had a chance to look at their applications because they do give some very valuable feedback to us on their experiences in serving. So with that, I would like there is a resolution that will need a motion for approval.
First, I want to ask if there are any of the commissioner, I'm trying to look around the room and see if anyone is here that maybe they wanted to speak. I don't see anyone. Okay. With that, council members, do I have a motion? Moved by Knutson,
Second?
seconded by Smith. The motion to approve the attached resolution for commission reappointments. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. And thank you to all of our commissioners who serve. It's a great way to volunteer and help our city. Much appreciated. Moving on in our agenda, we have a presentation from Ramsey County Commissioner Victoria Reinhardt. Welcome to our city council meeting, and thank you for staying. Commissioner Reinhardt was here earlier during our workshop. Make sure if you don't have a chance, if you weren't here during the workshop, she made a very dynamic presentation concerning the ponds of Maplewood and also the gun range. So please watch that on the video replay. Welcome, Commissioner Reinhardt.
Thank you. Very pleased to be here tonight. And I'm going to start out with just kind of doing a little bit of an overview of our budget process and how some of the things that we are really working on. And I will, at the end, I would like to just touch on the 2 things from the workshop. I spent quite a bit of time on it earlier, but I do think that some people will listen to the city council and not take the time to listen to all of the workshops. So I will at least give an overview of that as well. So Ramsey County is in its 2-year budget process right now. We have a 2-year budget that is more in line with the state budget, and the purpose of that, of course, is the fact that we are the implementation arm of the state, and so it makes sense to do that. During the first year of our budget, we really zero in on the dollars, and each year, even though we pass a 2-year budget, the fact of the matter is, in reality, we pass 1 year at a time. And so we will be passing adopting the budget for 2020 and the levy for 2020 in December of this year. And so 2021, of course, would be in December of 2020. Man, that's a lot of 20s. Anyway, so this is this year, the proposed tax levy increase is 4.75%. And I want to point out that this represents only a 0.05% budget increase. So what that tells you is our spending is not going up very much, but because there are a lot of reasons why you end up primarily having to put more on the levy. Primarily, it's usually about mandates that have been handed down without funding or insufficient funding. But we are also reallocating things, but the actual budget increase was 0.05%. This is the first budget cycle with our new structure of being organized into service delivery teams. And the idea there is to make sure that everyone in the county, that we understand that the goal for the county is prosperity, opportunity, well-being, and accountability through the lens of equity for every resident in Ramsey County. And so that is what we have done the service team is in basically those 4 areas and trying to make sure that we are making informed decisions. And they are based on measurements and outcomes that are included in the budget. And so we are also doing the check on, are we doing a good job? Do we need to do something differently? What's working? What maybe isn't working as well as we had thought it would? And that's really the primary concern when we get into the second year of the budget, so that we can give ourselves a grade, I guess, and try to make changes, because the bottom line is you need to be flexible enough to make changes if you're going to make progress. We had one public hearing already on the budget. That was on August 29th at the courthouse in St. Paul. And the second one will be November 25th, 6:30 p.m. at the Maplewood Library. I do want to point out, I was told earlier that is the Monday of Thanksgiving week. The fact is, we do not have an option of doing it at another time. That is in statute. So we set the date, but it's actually set for us. But we are doing it at the Maplewood Library. But I also want to point out that I really want to hear from people. It's not just at these public hearings, but emails, voicemails, letters, whatever mechanism is best for someone to get information to me, to provide input. I really value that, and that's one of the reasons I'm here tonight. So one of the things that we are looking at is, and I want to point out, is the partnering in economic development. Ramsey County is the only fully developed county in the state, which means increasing our tax base becomes more difficult. And the fact is, we have room to develop, but it's really redevelopment, and that's the difference here. And that leads me to what I really want to make sure you understand, and don't forget that this tool is available to you, and that is the Environmental Response Fund. We set it up so that if there is a project, but there is pollution in the land or on the property, that we can provide funding that, but for the cleanup costs, it wouldn't be developed. And so the Environmental Response Fund is something that if somebody is coming to you and saying, we'd like to redevelop this, or we'd like to develop something here, but there's such a cost in the cleanup that it wouldn't make it viable for them. So please remember that is out there. We have tried very hard to make sure that we divvy that fund up between the suburbs and the city of St. Paul. Primarily because the city of St. Paul could take it all, so we're very careful about trying to make sure we get it into the suburbs as well. So please know that tool is available to you. In environmental health, and when you were talking about the compost bin there, I was like, yay! My background is in the environmental field, and specifically in recycling and garbage and trying to do the right thing. And I often point out that when people say they're throwing away their garbage, there is no such place. It's just that simple. And it's one thing, I also say that I love it, and the reason, it kind of weird looks at that, but one of the reasons that I say that is because it's the one thing that no matter who you are, no matter where you're from or anything else, we all have control over what we put in the garbage. And if we choose to recycle a can, that makes a difference for future generations. So we have control over it, and what better thing to really educate yourself on and make sure that you're taking advantage of the opportunities. And we really want to decrease the material that's ending up in a landfill. So we have the program called Biz Recycling, and I know a number of the businesses within Maplewood have taken advantage of that, but it provides an assessment of what's going on in your business or your operation. It is done individualized, so it's not just, if it's a chain, if there's 3 of them in Maplewood, each one gets their own assessment. You can decide what you want to do or not do, but it's designed to help the environment and reduce your costs. And then we also provide some funding to bridge for education and for signage and different things, so that it will bridge until you see that benefit in your garbage bill. And as I said, it helps with the environment as well, and that's really the biggest reason. And we're really looking forward to, we have the refuse-derived fuel facility in Newport, but we're really looking to what is after combustion. We have a 75% recycling mandate from the state of Minnesota, and we need to really do more with the energy market development and planning for the future of waste to energy. And so we're looking at gasification, which is carbon neutral, the type that we are looking at anyway, and anaerobic digestion. And that brings us to organic waste and to recyclables. One of the things that we are doing at the Ramsey Washington Recycling and Energy Center is looking at durable compostable plastic bags for organics. And as you pointed out, Mayor Abrams, it's an optical sort that comes in. And that is, in fact, we are going to the state legislature asking for funds for an optical sort at the facility that will pull out the recyclables and will pull out the durable, organic, compostable bags. And so it's, I think it's very exciting. It does cost money, but the fact of the matter is, hand sorting really doesn't work. And especially when it comes to organic bags, I remember going to a facility once where they had the blue bag, and that was for compostables. But they had to hand pull them out. Well, the Genie bags, diaper bags, were the same color. And so they had a little bit of a problem with that. The fact is, optical sorting for the compostables, it will know the difference between bags, it'll know the difference between the colors, and it will also be safer and more environmentally friendly and pulling out those recyclables and really getting the value out of what used to be waste, because there is value in it for energy, recyclables, and really trying to do the best thing that we can. So I would like to, one of the things that we are really focusing in on is, as Senator Wellstone said, we all do better when we all do better. And the fact of the matter is, we are really committed to addressing historic inequities in our services. And so we're looking at things like the disproportionate out-of-home placement for minority youth, and in the justice system, the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative. We found some success in transforming our systems there, but we need to do more. We have many fewer, I think it's like 50% fewer kids going into the Juvenile Detention Center, but the fact is the proportions did not change. And so that tells us that we need to do something different. Transforming systems together is a high goal, but it is something that we need to do for our community and for healing in our community. I think, let's see here, I'm going to move on to Rush Line. In 2017, the cities along the line approved the locally preferred alternative as bus rapid transit alongside Phelan Boulevard, the Vento Trail, and Highway 61. And I, again, say over and over again, we will have a trail and this bus rapid transit will coexist. So that moved us into the environmental analysis phase, and that takes 2 years. This phase will involve the station area planning and include many more community engagement meetings, including stationary planning groups and more public hearings. After the environmental considerations and mitigation efforts are more defined, the project will come back to the City Council for a resolution of support before it moves forward to the next phase, which is project development. I think I've kind of covered all of those things, so I do want to come back to the two things that I discussed at the workshop. One is the proposed budget from the county manager proposed closing the Ponds of Battle Creek Golf Course and Driving Range on January 1st, 2021. And I did, whether you support that or not, it really is about a process that did not take place. And when I look at some of the other big decisions that we made, such as the Vadnais Dome and other things of that nature, we had workshops. The county board had workshops. We had community meetings. We had community outreach in other ways as well. And then we made a decision to move forward and partnered with the community to make that happen, including some funding that is going to be coming forward with that. And I feel that that process should have happened here. And we have the 21st century Ramsey County Parks system vision, and to pull one golf course out of that discussion did not make sense to me, and I think that we owe it to the constituents, no matter where it is. I mean, if this is the Ponds this time, but honestly, we need to make sure that we have the public engagement. So I'm going to very quickly read into the record for the City Council the letter that I sent out, and I appreciate it, and I'll let you talk about the action or what you are planning to do after that. But this is to the Ramsey County Manager. And it was copied to the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners. It was from September 18th. To achieve our vision for a Ramsey County 21st century park system, the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners will need to make important decisions on park system changes that will best serve all Ramsey County residents equitably. The purpose of the addenda are the first one, the addendum one, is to remove the closure of the Ponds of Battle Creek Driving Range and Golf Course from the 2021 budget. And the second addendum is to prepare and implement a plan for board workshops and engaging the community to learn about their needs and wants from the 21st century Ramsey County Park System. Data from staff and community input will help inform the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners as we make important decisions regarding changes to facilities and programming. Addendum 1 is to remove the closure date of January 1, 2021 for the golf course from the budget. The budget impacts as contained in the 2021 proposed budget would be zero in 2020 and a revenue increase of an estimated $5,000 in 2021. The staffing impact for 2021 could delay reallocation of staff to other park system efforts by up to 1 year, and therefore there is no budget impact in 2021 for taking that out of the budget or keeping it open. That's what it comes down to. There's also a cost associated with maintenance of a closed facility, but since that wasn't included in the budget, I did not try to calculate that expenditure. And this is a part, as I said, and you obviously all heard this before, but is with or without the passage of this addendum, the impact of the closure is for the 2021 budget, which will be voted on in December of 2020. Exploring options for this site, including the sale of the Ponds of Battle Creek as is, or other site options identified by the zoning authority, the City of Maplewood, will continue. The second addendum, I think, is, although it doesn't mention the ponds, I think is very critical to the discussion because I do think it has to, all of these decisions for the park system have to be looked at together, and how do you make this happen? So the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners has built an open, transparent, and thoughtful process to make transformational change throughout our county. A pillar of that process is community engagement. Wherever and whenever we can build partnerships, better outcomes follow. I believe the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners wants to hear from our constituents and needs to engage the community on the 21st century Ramsey County Park System. Board workshops with data from staff and input from our community members will assist us in making informed decisions about resource allocation for staff and facilities that will best meet community needs and wants in an equitable manner. Although community engagement and workshops are incorporated into the county budget, I have included a one-time expenditure of up to $5,000 for incidentals associated with gathering community input. I did this addendum to make sure that that public process takes place in 2020 and that there's a budget allocated for it, although I doubt that that would actually be needed. But I wanted to make it crystal clear that this process needs to include that discussion in 2020. So the other item that I discussed was the gun range that is located on the same parcel of property, so it is abutting it. And for many years, we have had issues with the noise from the long guns that are being fired there. And it is alarming and jarring, and I have tried many different ways to try to deal with that issue. It is now the county manager and the county attorney's office have met with the deputy mayor of St. Paul. I had met with her earlier and had given her information, a report that was prepared by my office on noise suppressors, and really trying to move this forward to try to figure out what would happen. And I wanted to report to you that the county manager, the chair of the county board, are all very supportive of addressing this problem once and for all. And so trying to figure out how that would happen. Is it suppression equipment that if it works, great. If not, then we have to go to something else. Is it removing the long guns from being shot there at all? Or is it closing the facility? And I think that all options are on the table. And I do want to point out that for a long time, I thought that they needed to have this outdoor range to be certified to the post board. And some people sitting behind me, I'm sure, know more about that process than I do. But the fact of the matter is, it does not have to be outside. And so and the fact that the St. Paul Police Department now has a brand-new facility for a shooting range, and there are other options that are out there as well, that I felt that it was time that we simply address it. And I think that, and one of the things I pointed out earlier is, if I thought this was going to have any impact on public safety, I would not be pressing this. And I think that we all agree that public safety is the most important thing that we need to do in our communities, so people feel safe and can go to work and go to school and recreate and all the things that you do with your families in our communities. But the fact of the matter is, this is not a public safety issue. It is a change of how they would train, but it is not a public safety issue. So I need to make that very clear. I'm not anti-police, I'm not anti-training. In fact, I think it's very, very important, and obviously in our own sheriff's department, I think that that is very important as well. So we all agree on that. But the jarring noise is something that has been a problem for a long time, and I think that needs to be addressed, and it will be addressed. I have been assured of that. I think that covers everything. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to respond.
Council members, do you have any questions? Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. I think, not to preempt probably what you're about to say, but I just, once again, want to thank you for your advocacy on all of these issues. I think we all believe strongly in the partnership between the county and the city, and I look forward to us finding some positive resolutions to some of these things, particularly on the gun range and the pond. So thank you for your partnership, and I'm very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight and for your presentation. Commissioner Reinhardt alluded to something that we talked about during our workshop, and that was the consensus of the council to write a letter that would be sent to all of the county commissioners in favor of the Addendum 1 and Addendum 2 that she is referring to, that basically demands that there be a robust public engagement process to have the discussion about the ponds. The way that the ponds has been proposed to be closed kind of came in through the back door. It seems rather random in terms of what the county is planning on doing in the future, which is the 21st Century Ramsey County Park System Plan, that why would you eliminate a golf course before you've even gone through the planning process that you've already approved is going to be happening. And so the Maplewood Council is going to be sending a letter to the commissioners. And one thing that I did during the workshop was I encouraged all of our residents to email or phone calls to all of the county commissioners and indicate that it is important that we have a public process to discuss the future of the ponds golf course, that it should not just simply be closed as part of kind of a backdoor, second thought budget process, that we really need to hear from our residents, from our businesses, from our community about the ponds, and we need to make that clear. So I've invited all of our residents to please email and phone the commissioners, and also now we have a date for that meeting that is going to be held in Maplewood. It's a budget meeting. It's not the public hearing that we would like to have on the ponds, but it's at least the first opportunity, and that date again is November 25th at 6:30 at our Maplewood Library. So please take that opportunity as well to voice your opinion on the ponds and the budget process that the county is going to be engaging in. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving on to our consent agenda. We have 3 items on that. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? Further discussion, I know I would like to highlight number 2 on that, on our consent agenda. Councilmember Smith, do you have something else too?
If you could also be nice to highlight number 3.
Okay, and highlight number 3. All right, number 2. Ms. Paulseth, do you want to tell us what this is? And I guess the highlight is really for the council members as well, and for the citizens. If you take a look at the Historical Society annual appropriation, it indicates in our report that the 2018 annual financial report is attached. It was not attached. The only thing that we had was a snapshot for the month of July. It showed only 1 month, and so today I asked the city manager if she would get the full year financial report for 2018, and that has been passed out. It's up at the DS for us to review. I'm not certain that it makes a difference in terms of our decision-making, but I wanted the record to be complete. Ms. Paulseth, can you just give us a little bit of background on this?
Sure, Madam Mayor and Council. It's been customary for the last many, many years that the council has awarded an appropriation to the Historical Society. So I, as in past years, the finance director has brought this forward to the council at about this time of the year, about the middle of the year. So the appropriation was raised to $5,000 last year. They are required to provide the financial reports. They did provide their balance sheet, which is updated monthly. So the most current information they had at the time was July. But yes, you are correct. The entire year of 2018 was not provided. I accepted the current balance sheet as proof of the financial requirements, but it's always good to have that full year report in hand. So I thank you for calling that to our attention.
City Clerkson, can you make sure that this is put onto the website in terms of making the packet complete? That way, we certainly want our packets to reflect what we say we're looking at. Councilmember Smith.
Just to highlight.
On number three? Okay. Number 3, who's got that one?
Donation.
Mr. Love?
Yes, Mayor and Council, the family of Gregory Garcia would like to make a donation for a memorial bench plaque at Fish Creek, and I think I'll just read the little paragraph that's in this report. Gregory Garcia had relatives that lived on Point Douglas Road near Carver Avenue when he was a child. He spent many summers playing in the Fish Creek area with his cousins and attending camp at Carver Lake Park. He always had an interest in the area. When Dorland Road, south of Carver Avenue, was developed, he dreamed of building a home on that street. In 1991, the dream became reality when he and his wife bought a lot, and he did as much work as his skills as a heavy equipment operator allowed. He excavated and backfilled the foundation, did the final grading, laid the sod and landscaping, and poured concrete driveway and patio himself. He was so proud of the work he did and being able to raise his family in the area that he had such a great childhood memories. He loved to walk Fish Creek from beginning to end, especially in the fall. His wife, Connie, still lives in their home on Dorland Road and walks the trails and preserve as often as possible. She wishes to have a bench that honors her husband's love for the area.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other discussion concerning the consent agenda? All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. And now we move on to public hearings. We do have a public hearing tonight concerning our rental housing licensing program. And I thought what I would do is go over the basics on what's going to happen for our public hearing. We're first going to hear from Mr. Thompson, who is going to talk about, he's our Community Development Director, he's going to talk about the rental housing licensing. And then I will call on the council to ask any questions of Mr. Thompson. And at that point, when we've exhausted the questions, then we are going to go to the open public hearing. I'll open the public hearing. And if you are, Ms. Sint, the sign-up sheet, if you are here and would like to speak during the public hearing, you should go back at this point and go and sign up for the public hearing. Once the public hearing is open, then you will have an opportunity to state your name and address. You'll be given 3 minutes, and Ms. Sint will, she has a timer for that, so that you can address the City Council concerning the rental housing licensing program. once we have gone through all of those who want to sign up, I'll ask if there's anyone else who would like to speak concerning the matter. And at that point, if there's no one else, then I will close the public hearing. If there are any questions that come up during the public comments, staff will, at that point, once we close the hearing, will address all of the questions at once. So it's a little bit more efficient. We'll get all of the questions answered. At that point, then, the council will talk about further questions or comments, and then we will take appropriate action. So that's kind of a little thumbnail sketch on what we're going to be doing. Mr. Thompson, do you want to start? I know you have a PowerPoint for us.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and Council. So I'll just want to give you kind of a brief outline of the ordinance, certainly for any members of the audience or public that are here tonight, also to just understand kind of what's in the draft ordinance that's before you tonight for adoption. I think we've tried to simplify the rental housing ordinance into kind of three primary goals. And that is, one, we're trying to provide clean, secure, and well-maintained rental properties and units throughout the community. Second, we're trying to ensure that we have safe and crime-free housing for renters. And then lastly, I think this is an effective tool to kind of enhance overall neighborhood stability throughout the entire community. Oops. So with kind of those goals in mind, I do just want to walk through some of the basics of the ordinance and some of the details that are in there so that the council and the community, again, have an understanding of what's in the draft ordinance. So under the draft ordinance, all rental dwelling units will be required to be licensed, and that would be starting next year. So in 2020 is when that licensing requirement would become effective. The exceptions to the license requirement, we've expanded this a little bit from the council's last workshop. Any unit that's obviously occupied by the owner or a qualifying relative of the owner would be exempt from requiring the license. So that would allow potentially a person to rent a room or have a renter within the dwelling unit. If the owner lives there, they still would be exempt. The second provision is largely around the snowbirds. So if it's rented for less than 120 days per year and the owner resides in the home the remaining part of the year, they would not require a license. And then after the council workshop, we did take a little bit closer look at the kind of the other licensed facilities. So we tweaked some of the language that was in the ordinance around Department of Health licensed facilities for group homes and nursing homes, those types of facilities. But we've also specifically called out that if we've approved a reasonable accommodation for a facility, they would also be exempt from our licensing. Again, that's an update from the last council review of this. And then just to reiterate, it would be an annual license that would need to be approved by the city on every year. So every owner would need to have a written tenant application. As part of that application, they would be required to conduct a criminal background check on any prospective tenants that reside within the unit. The ordinance doesn't require any sort of action around the results of the criminal background check. It's really just a knowledge and kind of screening that they're obligated to do under the ordinance as part of their license. It would require a written lease with anybody that's residing in the property, and then does happen to have an addendum that the tenants will comply with a crime-free, drug-free housing addendum to that lease. Some additional provisions is that they do need to provide a local contact within the Twin Cities metropolitan area for who's responsible for the management of that property. That could certainly be the owner or any representative of the owner that could qualify as their property manager. And then either the owner or that property manager would be required to go through a training around providing crime-free housing in the community. Some additional provisions is that any owner would be required to provide public hearing notices to the tenants. So if the city sends a public hearing notice, we want to make sure that all residents are aware of that. Second, it would have to allow political candidates access to multifamily buildings. It's unique, but it's actually a statute requirement, so we've just put that in the draft ordinance. And then does adopt some additional provisions around snow and ice removal, noting that during the winter months, for the safety and of the residents that are living there, there's some time provisions of when that snow and ice removal has to occur based on the amount of snow that we receive. And then as we talked about, in some past discussions, we did add a provision that just clarifies that this is, of course, a requirement already, but as part of any of these required things that we're doing as part of the license, reminding landlords and owners that they are required to comply with the Federal Fair Housing Act. And we can certainly look at doing education around what that means to ensure that those provisions are maintained. In terms of process, so the license application would be submitted to the city for review and approval. The city will conduct a criminal background check on the owners or operators of those facilities. And then, assuming they meet all of our license requirements and our inspection of the property, the city staff would issue that license under the authority of the city manager. That could be appealed, so if we do deny a license or appeal a license, I suppose that could be appealed to the council, but only the council itself can revoke or suspend a license once it's been issued. Some of the provisions in the ordinance is that they do have to maintain the property in compliance with all city code requirements. So this is kind of a list of all the provisions in our code that would be kind of subject to an inspection to ensure that on an ongoing basis that they're complying with these requirements. And then we are planning to inspect these properties on a 1 to 3 year cycle, and we will have a written policy that determines what properties are inspected every year and which ones are inspected only on a 3 year cycle. And that'll be based on the construction of like a newer building, but also kind of their compliance record and their history of inspections from, in past years. So as I mentioned, the effective date of this ordinance as it's drafted today is January 1st, 2020. So all of the licensing triggers in 2020. As we start to implement the inspection cycle policy, this is what we're looking at doing, which is next year there would be all multifamily buildings, which we know there are 96 buildings in Maplewood. Those would all be inspected next year. And then the following year, we would inspect half of the single-family properties, which we estimate to be about 250. And then in year 3 of initial rollout, we'd inspect the other half of properties. And then, of course, any of the ones that are kind of, and then we would roll on to the 1 to 3 year cycle as it gets adopted. This is the proposed fee structure. So we're proposing the annual license be $150 per building plus $50 per unit, noting that the inspection cost would be covered under that license fee. We would also not charge any for the initial reinspection because we expect that to be fairly common, that we have to go back just to verify that any issues have been addressed. But then as kind of incentive for well-performing properties or a disincentive to those that are having additional inspections, there would then be additional fees once we get beyond the first reinspection. And as we've talked about the fee schedule and budget, we have kind of planned and programmed for a 3% increase in that annual license, entirely because this program is structured such that the fees are supporting the city's direct costs for doing the inspections and administering the license in both directions. So the city's property tax levy would not support the program, but also the license revenue is not supporting the general fund in any other sort. It's really, we're trying to match the program expenses with the exact license fees that we are charging to be able to administer the service. So just some examples of what that fee may look like. A single-family home would be $200 per year. A duplex where both units are rented would be $250 per year. And then some of the fees from $1,400 up to $7,650, again, based on some of those larger multifamily buildings based on the number of units. So tonight, Mayor Abrams, you introduced the public hearing component. We did provide a notice to over 1,000 people just about the draft, about the public hearing tonight and that around the ordinance. We did receive a number of phone calls, primarily from single-family homeowners that are listed in property taxes for non-homestead, but are in fact not renting. And we knew that it's harder to identify the single-family, so we did answer a number of calls around clarifying that if you do own a single-family property and you're not renting it under the provisions of the ordinance wouldn't apply. And then the two actions we're requesting from the council tonight is one, to adopt the ordinance, which would establish the rental housing licensing program, and the second is to adopt the resolution, which would authorize summary publication of that ordinance, noting that we should add to that an effective date of January 1st of 2020. So with that, Mayor and Council, happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Councilmember Niblett.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Thompson, I have one question. Going back to your exceptions, I didn't exactly understand when you said, when you were referring to other licensed residential facilities, you said something in reference to reasonable accommodations. That's an exception. Could you expand on that for me a little bit?
Sure. So, Mayor and Council, this is a provision that after our city attorney reviewed had kind of recommended. As you'll recall, a couple months ago, the council adopted a reasonable accommodation ordinance, which is if someone is requesting accommodation for a type of housing or any sort of accommodation, and we've issued a license for that, they wouldn't also then require a rental license from the city.
Got it. Thank you.
Councilmember Knutson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just have a question on page 52, letter F. It says operating or allowing a rental property to be used in such a manner to constitute a breach of peace. I'm just thinking of that situation we had with massage parlor, and I'm wondering if that owner knew anything about that, or does this suggest that upon discovery of some kind of breach of peace, that the chief of police would make a recommendation? I'm just thinking of the property owner that doesn't really know what's going on in the facility.
And Mayor, I might kind of ask Chief Nadeau to weigh in on a little bit on some of the more public safety.
Let's hear from you.
Thank you, council members. Knutson, so I think that you've actually got two different things here. If there was a breach of the peace, let's say that there was an assault that was perpetrated by one person that lived in an apartment complex versus the other person that lived in the apartment complex, the police department would be following up on that. There would actually be probably two different ordinances that would apply. One would be the more recently implemented excessive calls for service ordinance. So they would get a letter from the city talking about the violation and asking them to take steps. The rental license would be another thing that we bring into play and make sure that the apartment complex ownership or management was aware of that particular breach of the peace. It wouldn't obviously is a single violation trigger necessarily even an eviction, but if there was repeated problems with violence or crime and disorder on their property, that would be a tool that we would look at.
Thank you.
Any other questions, council members? Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. I know last time we talked about this, we talked about our expectation that landlords comply with the Fair Housing Act and are not acting in discriminatory ways. I brought up some concerns around criminal background checks and I think concern about that being used as a means to deny housing to people for other reasons, be that, myriad of different discrimination or discriminatory acts. So I'm glad we have that clause in there about the Fair Housing Act. Are we, however, going to be in the position of having to take complaints on and somehow investigate and enforce violations of the Fair Housing Act, or is that something that we act upon based on findings from other agencies? That seems like maybe not our jurisdiction, and I'm just wondering how that plays out.
I think Mr. Beatty is probably the best one to respond
Sure.
to that.
Madam Mayor, Council, that's essentially a federal issue, and I think that we would not be doing the investigation, but if evidence of such a violation came to the city's attention, that's when it would factor into decisions on licensing.
One more question.
One more question?
I would love to see, as this is implemented, if there is a way for us to link from our website or give some sort of resources to renters that if there is a complaint to be made, that we point them to the right agency and make that easy for them. Because I do feel like if we're going to step into this, let's make sure that we're paving the way should that be an issue. Hopefully it won't be.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other questions, this is now the time for the public hearing. I'll use my gavel in just a moment. I want to make sure that anyone who has an interest in speaking tonight, that they have signed up. Ms. Sint is coming forward with the sign-up sheet. Looks like we've got 13 people signed up. Just a reminder that this is our opportunity to hear what you have to say about this. And any questions that you have, we will answer after the public hearing is closed. This isn't really a dialogue. It's an opportunity for us to listen intently on what it is that you want to share with us. So with that, I open up the public hearing concerning the rental housing licensing program. The first person on the list is Gordy and Joyce Barrick. Is that correct? Pardon me? Okay, you'll decline? Okay, then we have next on the list, Pat Flaherty. Welcome to the City Council, Mr. Flaherty.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I own Birch Glen Apartments, 60-unit building. I see the requirements here are either common sense items or things that are already required by state law. The only addition I see to this that's not required of me is me to have a criminal background check on me. Not concerned about that. The second thing is me to now pay a fee for things I'm already doing. Everyone thinks a landlord just wants to make money. I hate raising rents. I have people who've been in my building for 12 years. They've had 2 or 3 rent increases. I don't increase my rent every year. I have a lot of people on fixed income. Rent increases are tough on them. There's 2 things I cannot control. I cannot control taxes. I cannot control utilities. I have a third thing I can't control. One of my biggest jobs is controlling costs to keep my people happy. This is something that's not going to keep my people happy. It's going to be another fee that eventually just rolls down to them. And for things we're already doing. So I think it's unfair to my tenants and for things that we're already doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flaherty. Next, we have Philip Tran. Philip Tran. Philip Tran. Okay, moving on. We have Bob Wernley, and I might have pronounced that wrong.
I'll decline for now.
Okay, decline. Don Snitterich? Decline. Okay. Don Haugen? Decline. Okay. Stephanie Heron? Okay. Brenda O'Connell?
Hello, everyone. I'm Brenda O'Connell. I actually put the wrong address. I am representing 1255 as a property manager, and I really appreciate the city actually caring about their rentals. It makes it very easy for me as a property manager to have support from the community, and I wanted to say thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. Next, we have Kristen Poffenberger. Decline. John Wegleitner.
Thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate it. I've been a landlord since 1988, and I've never had any problems with compliance with any of the codes, any of the police requirements, any of the tenants. We've enjoyed perfect relationships in a contractual relationship. I have all the tenants sign a standard lease agreement. This is a legal document between an owner and the tenants. Now it seems like Maplewood wants to interfere with a relationship between 2 parties. We've been through all these years without all these additional burdensome and onerous requirements. Now, all of a sudden, we're hit with a landslide of new regulations, onerous and burdensome, and those costs will be passed down to the tenants. I think all the landlords or owners are just trying to provide affordable housing. And it was said here earlier, we don't like raising rents any more than you would if you had if you were a tenant and you received a rental increase every year. They just don't like that. I'm surprised the 5,000 tenants inside of Maplewood that have been identified aren't at this meeting, or I don't even know if they knew about it, but it certainly will affect them because it will affect their rent increase. I think, just personally, Maplewood should stick to the bread and butter issues of this community. Police and fire, we've got issues here. We've got one less fire station on the northwest side. I know you're addressing it with another station, but we've got an 8-minute response time where my house is. I'm a little bit familiar with response times and golden hours and how important that first initial 8-minute response is. Bread and butter issues like roads and bridges. On County Road B, the road is flooding out. You got to go through cones. That's where Maplewood should stay in its lane and work on the basic bread and butter stuff and trying to get into the rental business and trying to get into the garbage business and try to get into the recycling business and all these other things. It's the bread and butter I think we're missing out on. It's like my teenage son that wants to join the basket weaving team. It's like, I'd like you to stick with reading, writing, and arithmetic and excel in those things, and then come to me when you're doing really well in all these other categories, and then we'll see about getting you on these other teams and other electives and other basket weaving teams. Is my 3 minutes just about up? I do want to thank you for your time. I'm real concerned, though, that this will just be a big burden, onerous and burdensome, and illegal search and seizure. Our Constitution guarantees privacy with illegal searches and seizure, just like the freedom of the press, freedom of religion, and all kinds of other freedoms that are bestowed in the Constitution. So Maplewood can make rules, but our Constitution is set up to protect our basic liberties and privacy. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Wagenleitner. And the last person signed up is Steve Batiste.
I didn't know I was signing up to get up there, but anyway.
If you'd like to come up, you can.
I have some questions, yeah.
Why don't you come up to the microphone and please state your name?
I am Steve Batiste, and I guess one of my questions, I missed the first part of the meeting, sorry. Are you going to require that we do a background check on the tenants we have now, or are you going to or just the tenants that turn over?
We will answer all questions after we close.
Oh, you will?
Yes. So if you have any other questions, now's the time to ask them. And then we will have staff talk about them and answer the questions.
I guess, and yeah, regarding the background check, when you do the background check on somebody, if they've got a criminal background, are you suggesting that we should not take a look at them, or what do you see? I don't quite get that.
I will jump in on this and say absolutely not. That's not what we're saying.
Okay.
But I'll have staff talk about how it works, the implementation of the program.
Oh, okay.
That is absolutely not what we are saying.
Okay. It's not, maybe not a bad requirement, no. Okay, I think that was required. Or required training, what does that consist of?
We'll get you that answer in a few minutes. What
Okay.
else would you like
Does
to know?
anybody here on, the council members, or anybody here, do they actually own property, the rental property?
Do we have, we'll have council respond to that at
Okay.
the end.
And you said something about snow and ice removal requirement. I didn't quite get the details on that.
We'll get that answer too.
Okay. I'd like to know if I can give you, I'm not crazy about giving out my social security number for you to do a background check. Is that going to be a requirement?
We'll get you that answer.
Okay. I got a lot of questions. Okay, I think that's probably it.
Okay, we'll get you
All
your
right,
answers
hey,
in just a
good.
few minutes.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak concerning the rental housing licensing program? Do you want to approach the microphone, and please give us your name and your address since you're not signed up? Go ahead.
My name is Diane Pelzer, and I own one side-by-side in Maplewood. I also own rental property in St. Paul. I'm an active member of the Minnesota Housing Association. I do everything by the rules for that in St. Paul. I'm already doing everything. I'm already paying for all this stuff already, and now I'm going to be paying in Maplewood for the same thing that I've been doing all these years. I have found through the years that, like some of the other people have said, all I do is pay. My renters tell me that I'm the best landlord they've ever had. I only raise my rent when I feel that they can afford it. I only rent for leases for a year at a time. I do not have tranches. The minimum I lease for is a year at a time in St. Paul and in Maplewood. My people in Maplewood, in my side-by-side, one of my guys has been there, this is his 5th year, and my other renter, this is their 2nd or 3rd year. And they're very happy with me. I know it's hard to find places to rent, so they always tell you they're happy with you. But my renters are very happy with me. And if you look back at my history, I don't think you should base it on starting out right now. But I've been in the rental business for 40 years. There should be something you're looking at to see if the people who are owners in Maplewood have done anything wrong. I was just at a Minnesota Housing Association meeting this week, and they laughed when I told them that Maplewood was going to require background checks on the owners. They said other places have tried that, and it fell by the wayside in a short period of time. So I educate myself on an ongoing basis, and I don't think I should have to do all this all over again. I've been doing it for years, and there should be some benefit to me for that. And I've done this in addition to my professional life. So, I mean, I've paid my dues. I don't think I have to pay more at this point. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Pelzer.
Okay.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Would you please approach the podium? Would you please give us your name and your address?
Sure. Hi, my name is Bob Wernicke, and I own a property at 1950 Manton. It's a single-family residence. Been in the rental business, my family, since I was 5 years old, and I've personally owned properties, income properties, for the last 40 years. I do believe this is a little bit onerous on the, it's a single-family home. That's the only property I have here in Maplewood. I have multiple properties in St. Paul, never had an issue. And these changes that you are proposing, which I suspect are going to get voted on tonight, are a bit onerous. And I mean, I'm going to look at the very least, I'm going to have to raise rent $20 a month for this tenant. And she's a single gal teacher, and it's a bit much. The concern I've always had with inspections, and I'm going to use my example as in the city of St. Paul, is when they're talking about, when they come out and inspect, I can have a clean inspection. Then the next time, with nothing changed on the property, you get a different inspector in there, and then they find something. And then the next time they find something, and it's something just very minor, but it seems like it's a moving target and it's hard to kind of keep up with. And the question I'm going to ask tonight is, will they provide a checklist so that we, as landlords, can come in making sure everything is done? As an example, they're real, I know in City of St. Paul, they are real stringent on fire extinguishers and some form of fire suppression systems. That's one thing that, again, one inspector will tell you one thing, another inspector will tell you another. So I'd like to get a clear definition of that. I think that's reasonable. I can just go through the punch list knowing that I've done everything. When I get it inspected, we're all set. The next thing I want to discuss is how much notice will we be given for these inspections, and when will the inspections start? Are they going to, the program starts January 1. Does that mean we're going to be getting notices for inspection January 1, or is it going to be spring, summer? I'm not sure. That hasn't been defined. But yeah, the big thing is I'd like to see a checklist of what constitutes being adhering to city code. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. There was another hand. Please give us your name and your address.
I'm John Olson. I inherited my mother's house on Phelan Place. And my comment basically follows up here. I hope that there will be some resources for rental owners. I suggest a website that consolidates all the requirements. In particular, I'm wondering about a requirement about square footage per occupant, if that sort of requirement is part of the statute. And I'm hoping that the training also includes those other kind of things besides just the parts that you were talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Over here? Vicente, are you getting all of these names? I'm trying to too. Can you start with your name and your address for the record?
I think I can handle that. My name is Paul Schreier, and I assume you want the address of the properties that we manage?
Just your, right.
Yeah.
Your address.
It's a lot of them. It's Maryland and
Your business
McKnight.
address.
Business address is actually Business Heights. Sorry, the apartments are at McKnight in Maryland, Beaver Creek Apartments. There's 104 units there, something like that. We also manage some apartments, fair number of apartments in Lower Canada. They did an ordinance very similar to this. I'm sure it's been 10 years because time flies by. The biggest issues that we frankly have with it, we hate paying fees like everybody else, but it's a significant amount of time for us to have somebody accompany an inspector through all these units. Again, we got 104 units in Beaver Creek. Again, my impression is, I can't say we've never had a police incident at our buildings. I'm sure we have. We deal with them. As Mr. Flaherty indicated, we do just about everything on this list already. We do the crime-free addendums, everything. And now we feel like we got to pay for it. I guess like everybody else in here, I think we'd like to have some, deference for good behavior. I know when Little Canada adopted their ordinance, they adopted it in response to the Montreal courts having so many problems and such a disaster, and people brought that up at, pretty informal meetings, and we're told by the attorneys, we'd love to do a provincial license, but we can't do that, so everybody gets swept in this same net here. That to us, just doesn't seem right, but I'm wondering if this ordinance is a solution in search of a problem. I don't know if we have a lot of problem properties in Maplewood. I'm not aware of them. There's a lot of people in rental units, and again, a certain number of them are going to cause problems, and I think most landlords deal with those problems. And, well, thanks. I just had to throw in my 2 cents and be that guy that raises his hands late when everyone wants to leave.
Thank you, Mr. Schreier. There was one other hand that was up. Oh, okay.
My name is Garrett Kruger, and I have property at 1076 Mary Street.
I had a question. Well, first, I'd like to say that I agree with what's already been said. One of the biggest issues I have is not raising the rent. When I get a good tenant in, I want them to stay there. And I've had some good tenants, and I generally don't raise the rent. Now I'm going to have to. If you pass an ordinance like this, I'm going to have to raise it with the same rate at which I get charged fees. So that's going to be a problem for the tenants. The other thing I wanted to do, though, is I wanted to pose a question. Has anybody anywhere studied this to see if this is going to have any positive effect other than influencing the bottom line for the city of Maplewood and providing more revenue for you guys? Is there anything that comes back that somehow makes it better for the properties, for the tenants, for the landlords? So that's my question, my comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kruger. Anyone else? Anyone else? All right, with that then, I am going to close the public hearing. And we have a series of questions that I'd like to ask staff. I took some notes, and let's start going through those. Let's see. One of the things that was raised by Mr. Wegleitner was other kinds of problems, such as the flooding in County Road, on County Road B this last spring. Mr. Love, do you want to address that? County Road B is a county road, but Mr. Love can kind of explain it a little bit more.
Mayor and council, I believe they're talking about underneath the underpass of 35E there, and you're correct. That is a county road there. They're the ones that are working towards a more permanent solution, but it has been a reoccurring problem that they're looking at addressing.
Okay, there was also a question that was raised about illegal search and seizure. Chief Nadeau, do you want to talk about that?
Yes, Mayor, members of the council, certainly we want to respect the Constitution in as far as us going to inspect people's apartments. That's not a part of the ordinance. Even if it was a part of the ordinance, it's not something that we would do. Typically, when police are at some sort of a building, it's because we're called there. I believe the court has clarified that common areas of a building or a courtyard are not private property, and those areas can be inspected without being summoned. But as far as the inspections go, and I would certainly give this to Mr. Thompson if you'd like to speak to it. Those inspections, there's sufficient notice given when they're going to inspect an apartment. They do it with the management company after all of the tenants have been properly noticed. So we are not going to, inspect to look through people's property as much as we are to just make sure that they've got a clean, safe environment to live in.
Okay, thank you. There was another question by Mr. Wegleitner concerning, I think it was community engagement, Mr. Thompson. He asked the question about communication with tenants. I know the engagement happened before you began working for Maplewood, but do you want to just talk about the community engagement that we had over this issue? I know it's in your report, but if you just want to highlight that.
Sure. So, Mayor and Council, we did do some community engagement earlier this year, as you referenced. We did it in kind of focused, one on owners and landlords, and so we did send information out to all the potential landlords and owners in the community. We did hold 2 listening sessions, and there were about 80-plus people that attended those sessions, and they. That feedback was summarized in your report. Then we also did in I think summer we did some targeted communication to tenants, and we did hold a listening session. Harder to reach demographic, but I think there were only 3 people that attended that session, and really focused on some of the more fair housing issues that were in the ordinance. So that was kind of a summary of the community engagement we've done.
And I don't know if you're maybe the right person to talk to. Maybe I don't see Mr. Sharon here. Is he here? Mr. Sharon, do you want to just address briefly the engagement that we had through Maplewood Living concerning rental housing?
Yeah, we back in.
Do you want to come up to the DS, please? Thank you.
The Maplewood Living, we talked more about the announcement of this ordinance, and we had called for renters and landlords to come forward. I believe that was back in March when we did that initial announcement. And the planning folks at the building and code enforcement had put out letters to the landlords that we had on file.
Can you also address the comment cards? Because I know that in our packet, we had a lot of copies of comment cards to read that were part of the engagement.
The comment cards weren't through Living or Communications. They were directly through either the police or public safety and/or community development.
Okay, I didn't know where they came from. Thank you, Mr. Sharon, can you talk
Mayor-
about the comment cards? Because there's a number of comment cards that were provided to all of the council members as well.
Correct, Mayor. Those were the cards that were handed out at the listening session. So that in addition to just the feedback in dialogue format, we allowed or had those cards provided so anyone could provide written comments so we could include them to the council in tonight's meeting.
Okay. I think some of the next questions from Mr. Battisto, probably Mr. Thompson, you're the one that can address these. Could you talk about the process of requiring the background checks and how that's going to be implemented?
Sure. Yes, Mayor and Council, we've talked about for implementing that for existing properties would be a requirement around any sort of new leases or renewal of leases. So we wouldn't, if there's existing leases, go back and require background checks to be conducted. We want to honor any existing leases certainly that have been done and no additional screening when there's not already screening occurring.
Okay. And do you also want to comment on, I already made the comment that we are not suggesting any decision-making based on the criminal background check?
That is absolutely true. There's the ordinance really says two things. One, they have to have a application that is filled out, and that application has to include information to be able to do a background check. And secondly, then that they do conduct the background check. Those are the only requirements around screening for criminal history in the ordinance. There is nothing that says any sort of action or decision that has to be result in either manner for the results of that criminal background check.
Okay. Can you, Mr. Battisto also asked about training that is going to be required. Can you discuss that?
Sure. Yeah, Mayor and Council and Chief Nadeau can certainly add in as well if possible. It's a standard, or I should call it pretty typical training. It's called a Phase 1 multifamily crime-free housing, and it's just around kind of tenant and landlord best practices for managing crime-free housing and ensure that all people that live in a building are living in a safe and secure environment. We've also talked, we haven't gone through all the implementation stuff, but we recognize and receive some of the feedback that we can also use that to around broader topics certainly as well, to the extent of educating landlords or tenants around issues that are important, some of which have been talked about tonight.
And he also asked questions about snow and ice removal requirements. I know that was included in your report.
I just want to pull up the exact provision. Sorry. So it's in the draft ordinance for snow and ice. If there's 1 inch or more of snowfall, it would require removal of the snow within 12 hours from walkways, sidewalks, and steps. And if there's a snow event of 3 inches or more, it would require snow removal from parking lots and driveways within 72 hours of those snow events.
Okay. Mr. Battisto also had a question about the background check for owners in terms of requiring a social security number. Chief, can you please comment on that?
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I do not believe that a social security number would be necessary for a background check.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Wernicke asked about whether or not there would be a checklist or a punch list that would be provided for landlords for consistency purposes. That way, there wouldn't be that, different decisions or different inspections conducted by different inspectors. Mr. Thompson, can you speak on that?
Yeah, sure, Mayor, and a fair issue and one that we've talked quite a bit about internally. At our last meeting, we talked a lot about, the city has an existing, kind of its own housing code requirements that are kind of drafted into our ordinance, and they're actually fairly difficult to enforce. They're just more subjective, and so we have talked about going to the more standardized code of the International Property Maintenance Code, just to provide consistency across cities. Other cities adopt it. It's a kind of a recognized industry standard and provides more clear and objective things for an inspector to measure and to the gentleman's point, for an owner to understand to what standard they're being held to. We haven't talked about all the implementation stuff, but certainly we will look at items like as checklists and standardization to make sure that certainly our goal is not to find items on any inspection. We want to also be consistent just for administering the program and for fairness.
Mr. Wernicke also asked about how much notice would be given for the inspections.
Yes, Mayor and Council, we would certainly, we don't have a date or a number of days established. We wouldn't put that in an ordinance, but we will certainly provide more than sufficient notice to property owners and owners to allow us access into the building for the inspection. And also noting in the policy, we're talking about inspecting a certain percentage of the units and not every unit within necessarily a larger multifamily building, that as we could hit a certain percentage on every year that we're out there.
Can you kind of explain that? I know it's in your materials, that there's actually a phase-in. It would be physically impossible to inspect all of the rental units in our city on January 1st. It's an impossibility. Can you explain the phase-in that you've outlined for us?
Yeah, Mayor and Council. We have a 3-year rollout of kind of inspecting the initial rental units in the community. The first year would entirely focus on the multifamily, so 4+ unit buildings, and our goal is to inspect all of those buildings next year. They would not all occur on January 1st. We would spread those out throughout the year just to be able to administer the program. Then in years 2 and 3, we would then inspect half of the single-family homes in the community. And then after year 1, we're kind of re-inspecting whatever multifamily units are out there based on that 1 to 3 year cycle.
Okay. Mr. Olson asked about resources that would be available for landlords and educating landlords. I think maybe that was part of the training piece.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, we've talked about, yes, doing that as part of any training that the city puts on for the program. But we know there are a lot of great resources out there, nonprofit organizations, tenant advocacy groups, landlord groups that are out there that provide kind of best management practices. They're more qualified to know best practices than we are, but we certainly know about them and can connect both tenants and owners to the existing resources we know about.
Mr. Olson also asked about a requirement for square footage for occupants.
Mayor and Council, I'm not aware of any specific thing in our codes that have a square footage requirement per occupant.
Okay. Mr. Schreier asked about whether or not there was going to be any deference for good behavior.
So Mayor and Council, where you see that most is in the inspection policy, when we will inspect a property in a term between every 1 to 3 years, and that will be based on the history of compliance. So a property that's being well-maintained and complying with all of our provisions, you only see us out there every 3 years for an inspection. Where there are more problem properties and issues not being addressed, we would be there on every year. So we've tried to build those incentives in so that there's some flexibility there.
Okay, and the last question that I identified was from Mr. Kruger, and he asked about whether or not the issue had been studied and whether or not this kind of a program actually resulted in improved rental properties. Chief, I think I'm going to ask you about that because you have worked in another city where you did have rental licensing, an ordinance concerning that, and you have firsthand experience with it. Can you talk to us about what you observed under a rental housing ordinance?
Mayor, members of the council, I did work for 23 years in Brooklyn Center, and after that I was the chief of police in the city of Columbia Heights for 9 years. Both cities had a rental ordinance, and certainly there was a lot of apartment buildings and single-family homes that were rentals that did not pose some sort of a problem to the community. They were great tenants and they were great landlords. There were oftentimes, though, some that provided challenges, whether it was code, whether it was having a safe, livable environment for the folks that lived in that building, whether it was unaddressed issues of violence and disorder. The rental licensing, certainly in the city of Columbia Heights, did give us a really, I think, good and flexible tool to be able to work with landlords to address some of those issues. I believe I've informed the council prior to this that there was one particular person who held, I think, 4 or 5 licenses in the city. We had a number of problems with code. We had a number of problems with violence and disorder. After years of trying to work with that owner to mitigate those issues, eventually that license was pulled. It was the only one that happened for a cause in the time that I was there. And within just months of that happening, crime, disorder normalized in those buildings when a new owner came in and took over. And issues of the heat being on and insects and other things were addressed. And I think it goes to show that certainly there are some great landlords out there that do care about their tenants, that do have code-compliant buildings, but unfortunately there are others who are not as compliant or as concerned. And so in my experience, this has been a useful tool to make sure that the tenants in our city have a good, safe, clean environment to live in, and it's a safe place for their children, and you know, they're attractive, great neighbors in a neighborhood and in a community.
Okay, thank you. Staff, those are all of the questions that I wrote down. I don't know if I missed anything. I'll ask you if there were any other questions that you heard that haven't been addressed already. Mr. Thompson, did you identify any?
Mayor, the only thing that just a little bit more information on maybe the fee structure on how we arrived at that. You know, our goal was not to just set the fee based on what other cities do. We really did take a comprehensive look at establishing those fees based on really 2 criteria. One, the program being self-sufficient, that the fees are paying for the program, but also we balanced the fair and equitable component to make sure that they were reasonable. And ultimately, we landed on the numbers that we did, which equates to about a little over $4 per unit per month in a property. So when we looked across the city and units that were out there, we just thought that was fairly fair for the service and the cost that the city was incurring for providing that service.
Thank you for that. Mr. Nadeau, did you identify any other questions that came up during the public hearing that we haven't addressed?
I did not, Mayor.
Okay. Thank you. Then with that, we are going to move to council questions and comments. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. One thing before I make a couple other comments, I do think we should clarify, I think for what Mr. Schreier brought up, for the larger buildings, we're not going to inspect every unit. It'll be a selection of units that sort of rotates. That's my understanding, right, Mr. Thompson?
Correct.
Mr.
Yeah,
Thompson, is
so-
that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I
for
realize
that.
it's still time for your staff to take people around, but it's not going to all 140 units. That would be
Thank you for that clarification.
really onerous. You know, I think this is, we've talked about this a lot, and I think it's one of those things where fairness is sometimes hard. And we do have a problem in the city with some very troubling properties, both from a renter's perspective and from a neighbor's perspective. And those are properties that are owned by people who aren't here right now. And we know that. But unfortunately, we're not able to pass ordinances for certain people. And so it does put us in that position of having to create a program with some built-in incentives for good behavior, but it is going to have to impact the city. And so it is a challenge. I'm sensitive to a lot of the comments made tonight, and I understand that. I think what we owe it to you, and I think where Mr. Wernicke was going was a really good point, is we owe it to landlords to make us easy to do business with. We owe it to them to be predictable, to give them guides, to not have it be a moving target, to make inspections as easy as possible, and to work with landlords to do the best we can as a city to provide the level of service I think that we provide in other areas of the city as well. I think that is critical to do this. It's, you know, I don't expect the good quality landlords to be happy and excited about this. I get that. But I do think there is a need in the city, and I think that there are ways that we can do this to streamline the process as much as possible, and not do things for the sake of doing them. And to be clear, I mean, there were a couple of comments about fees and stuff. This is a self-funding program. The city is not taking any extra revenue in that's not going to fund this program. So it is a net zero program for the city from a revenue perspective. And I think that's also important to note. We are doing this really for three constituencies. One, I think, is to provide consistency for landlords so they understand exactly what the expectations are from the city. Two, to protect renters, to make sure that they have good quality, safe housing. And three, in some ways, I think this is almost as important as the renter's piece, is to make sure that homeowners are comfortable with rental properties in their neighborhood. I think there's a stigma against renters. I was a renter when I got elected here, and it was an election issue, if you believe that or not. I think we should be welcoming renters into our neighborhoods just as much as we welcome homeowners. And I think homeowners at the same time deserve the comfort and assurance that those renters are going to be held to the same standards and that we're going to have tools and resources to deal with those who don't meet our standards. So, but I do appreciate everybody's comments. And just lastly, I will say, while this ordinance may get passed and may get put in law, it doesn't mean it can't change either. And so if we get a year down the road and we find out that something is not ideal, something's not working, we can revisit that. And that is how this works. And so for those of you who are landlords who may not be thrilled about this, let's keep those lines of communications open, and let's make it better if we have to. I think that's a conversation that we're all willing to have. So,
Thank you. Councilmember Knutson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm kind of conflicted by this. It resonates with the gentleman's comment that it's a solution looking for a problem, just because I'm not aware, as you are, Councilman Smith, about the issues. I had one rental property in Minneapolis a number of years ago, and it was, as one gentleman suggested, you didn't know from time to time what the code was or who was going to visit, so it was disturbing. On the other hand, I hired a property manager, and the kind of things that that person did made me sign. It felt like I was buying a house. I mean, it really was intense. So on that side of it, I can really see the benefit of all this. To resonate what Councilman Smith said, though, is I'd like to make sure that Maplewood does a premier job of supporting its tenants first and its landlords as a place to develop properties. Because I think we're recognizing that rental properties are growing very, very fast, and many people do not want to own homes, especially the millenniums. So I think it's important that we resonate with the comments, but again, I think it's something we need to do and revisit.
And I have some comments that I'd like to at least read from Councilmember Juniman. She wasn't able to be here tonight, but she is very passionate about this issue, and I told her that I would share her thoughts with the rest of the council and with those here tonight. Councilmember Juniman indicated that she is supportive of the rental housing ordinance. She says that, if Councilmember Juniman was here, we know that she would remind us how long she's been on the council and that we've never had one of these ordinances before. And she is the longest-serving council member. And based on her experience, she says that it has become necessary because code enforcement is simply not enough. This ordinance is it's a necessary tool to ensure that everyone in our community has access to safe, secure housing and that quality of life is maintained in neighborhoods. The reasons that she is in favor of this is that we have aging homes and apartment buildings in our city and an increased number of rental units. She's concerned about absentee landlords, and for the public health and safety issues that substandard housing conditions lead to, she's very concerned about that. She believes that this ordinance will improve housing conditions and maintain stable neighborhoods. The goal here is for standards for safety and maintenance of rental units, guidance and education for rental property owners, She likes the idea of requiring written leases so that everyone knows and understands what the requirements are. The necessity for a 24-hour contact for an owner or a manager, that they have to, live in the Twin Cities or have someone here who is a contact person is important. When furnaces go out and it's the dead of winter and tenants don't know what to do, we need to have that type of contact information. She's in favor of the crime-free housing requirement, and also requiring that landlords comply with the Fair Housing Act. So those were her thoughts that she wanted me to share with the council. From my perspective, I wanted to start out by thanking Councilmember Smith, because he really brought this forward when he when he joined the council. I can tell you that this has been talked about since I've been on the council back in 2014, and there were a lot of reasons given. There were many other things to focus on, and the longer that I've been on the council, the more clear it has become to me that we need to do something about rental housing. So Councilmember Smith, thank you for bringing this forward and being kind of the real push behind getting something done and bringing us here. I wanted to make sure before I made any decisions about this that I really understood what the problem was in our community. And so I did a ride-along with our police department this last winter, and I asked the police to please show me what are the problems that you see in rental housing in our city. And they took me on a tour that was disturbing, to say the least. Now, I'm not talking about any of the landlords that are here, because I am certain that you are wonderful landlords and that you run your properties and that very well, and that you follow all of the laws. But what I saw in our city were unsafe conditions for children, rental units that didn't have the basics that we all come to expect in terms of running water and electricity that works and appliances so that you can cook a meal and that you can have, a refrigerator that works. Those are some absolute basics. And I became convinced that night that we needed to do something to make sure that we had tools for staff, that we could ensure that all of our units here are safe for all of our renters, for our families, for children. We have a large immigrant population in our community, and I want to make sure that some of the most vulnerable people in our community aren't afraid to report a landlord, that these inspections, that this ordinance will help in terms of providing basic expectations for living and the quality of life that all of our residents are entitled to. And so I became convinced that we had a need for this. I think the city has done an amazing job of engaging landlords, of going back to the drawing board, of looking at this. How can we both be reasonable and respectful to our landlords while also protecting our tenants, and then ensuring the stability in our neighborhoods. And so I think staff has done a really good job. I would concur with Councilmember Smith. I'm always kind of notorious that staff, if this gets passed tonight, then we need to come back and revisit this in maybe 6 months and do regular updates, at least because we've got a 3-year rollout on this, that staff comes back to us and reports what's working, what's not working, so that we can fix it. Because if it's not working for anybody, and we need to address that. But from my perspective, this is a really important ordinance that I absolutely am convinced that our city needs. And it doesn't need it because of the landlords that are sitting here. It's because we don't have enough tools to address those unsafe properties. And we really need to have those tools to ensure the quality of life that we are offering here in Maplewood. So, council members, anything else? All right, then this is the action time. There are 2 motions on page 43 of our packet. The first is a motion to adopt the ordinance establishing rental licensing requirements for rental dwellings.
Mayor, I move to adopt the ordinance establishing rental license requirements for rental dwellings.
Second.
Moved by Smith, seconded by Neblett, the motion to adopt the ordinance establishing rental licensing requirements for rental dwellings. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Mayor, I further move to adopt the resolution authorizing publication of ordinance by title and summary.
Second.
Moved by Smith, seconded by Neblett, the motion to adopt the resolution authorizing publication of ordinance by title and summary. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes. And what I can tell all those watching is that we will make sure that this is a fair ordinance, that we will roll this out with as much intentionality as we have taken to consider this, and implementation will do the very best that we can. So, moving on, we have no unfinished business. We are moving to new business, and we have the review of the 2020 charitable gambling requests. City Manager Coleman, do you want to take that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Abrams, members of the City Council. Every year, the City of Maplewood solicits requests for the charitable gambling funds, and every year, the request for the funds exceeds the available amount of money. This is the case this year as well. The city received 22 applications with $74,609 in requests, and as you know, we have $30,000 to award. Staff recommends that the City Council review the requests and fill out the provided score sheet that was attached to your packet. We will collect the score sheets and calculate the final suggested award amounts, which will be presented to the City Council on October 14th. I believe you have a preferred time to return those, but I don't know.
October 4th.
October 4th, thank you. With that, Mayor, usually in the past, we have allowed each of the applicants, if they're here, to come up and make a 1-minute pitch or description of their programs. I don't think we have too many in the room, but that's up to the mayor to decide whether you want to continue that tradition.
I certainly do. I know, I see a couple of people. I see Mr. Jensen. And, okay, we've got a couple who would like to come and make a presentation. Mr. Jensen, do you want to be first?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm Bob Jensen with the Maplewood Area Historical Society. I'd like to thank this council for the past funding of the Broom Troop Farm, which has made it a great venue for both historic events and non-historic events. And some of the requests that we're looking for would increase making it a very great place to visit. We're looking for lighting in the parking lots for our evening events. We're looking for carpeting in the barn basement. In our assembly area, we're looking for lighting to help with summer theater performances, and also some other flammable liquid storage for a safe environment. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jensen. Anyone else here for charitable gambling? Would you like to come up to the podium, please?
Hello, Council. My name is Kim Allswager. I'm the choir teacher at North St. Paul High School. And first of all, just thank you for your consideration, and thank you for opening the floor tonight. I'll just say a few words about what the choir does. So the choir program, we try to obviously serve the community as much as we can. I think music is such an important thing and such a vital part of so many events. But we sing all over the area here, including at assisted living facilities, at prisoner of war events, at annual prayer breakfasts. We just sang yesterday at a church pancake breakfast, and in addition to doing performances for Rotaries and various organizations, and we love it. That's why we do what we do, is to perform for people. However, our show choir, which has been growing and growing, they compete all over the Midwest, and the costs just increase so fast and so much faster than our students can keep up with, as well as our music budget. And sheet music and arrangements that we need to perform and compete with have actually gone up as far as $5,000 now, and that's just for the music that we have to learn and perform. And then copyright fees have come into play and have raised to about $4,000. And then that doesn't include the costumes and the travel and all of the expectations that are on our group to keep up to the competitive level that we're at. And then just means of getting around and performing, in the city as well. And so we're just thankful for your consideration, and of course, any assistance is greatly appreciated by not only myself, but the families and all of the choir students. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Rick Gelbman. I'm the president of Silver Lake Improvement Association, and I appreciate the opportunity, Ms. Mayor and council members, to speak to you. We continue to struggle with managing the lake in terms of maintaining the quality of the lake for people that live nearby. We've got people in North St. Paul, in Maplewood, White Bear Lake, St. Paul, that all use this very urban lake with 2 fishing docks, a beach close by for people to use. And our main goal is, one of our main activities is to treat the lake on an annual basis for invasive species. We have both Eurasian water milfoil and curly-leaf pondweed. City of Maplewood has invested a lot of money in Joy Park, and it's a very lovely park. It represents 22% of the lakeshore on the lake. So you've got a significant investment here. And what we're asking for is you to contribute up to $1,000 in the annual costs that we incur for treating the lake for the invasive species. This past year, it cost somewhere around $3,000. We have been fairly aggressive about trying to get many organizations to participate and share the partner with us in covering the costs of this, and would ask you to help contribute to that as well. Last year, you did provide us with $440, which is greatly appreciated, and we hope that you can see your way to providing with that kind of money or more. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any questions for me? Thank you.
Is there anyone else here to talk about charitable gambling? Welcome.
Hello, I wasn't planning on talking tonight, so I just thought, I'm Kelly, I'm with Child Incorporated, and what we are is we're all volunteers, a lot of teachers involved in our group. We help children that have been abused. We go to court with them. We educate the public and organizations on how to prevent child abuse. Unfortunately, we've had, with all the news on sexual abuse, we have a much higher demand for our services. And so we're just asking if you could help out. We're, like I said, all volunteers and everything. We just had a tutu run Saturday. We do a lot of fundraising, but we aren't able to meet the demand for our services to help these kids. So we'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. One more?
Good evening.
Good evening, Kristen.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I'm Kristen Poffenberger, Executive Director of the Maplewood Community Center. And we are here tonight asking for your support for our Maplewood Maple Pond Homes, which is a neighborhood center that we have programming in that focuses on multi-generational approach to housing. So the funds that we are requesting for helps the youth and the families in the program, both in the neighborhood center itself and in the programs in the YMCA, where they come and do safety on water, helping those learn how to swim and just be safer on the ponds, lakes, pools that we have around. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. I have to say, council, this is it's always a fun thing to do this, but it's also very challenging. Because on the one hand, you're going to feel like Santa Claus, and on the other hand, you're going to feel like the Grinch. Because there just isn't enough money. It's $30,000. And that is a lot of money, but there is, as you can see, there is a great need. I think, what did we have, $74,000 in requests. And so you've got all of the materials. I think Lois sent out also a calculator that will help fill that out, because we do have just $30,000. We can't spend any more than that. So make your decisions wisely. I always have to sit down with all of these and reread them again, and then I start putting them into piles and start focusing on, really where can we best put the money. It's a very difficult decision. So on the one hand, it's fun, but it's challenging. It's very challenging. Councilmember Smith, you've done this too?
I have, Mayor, and it is difficult. You are absolutely right. It's both fun and difficult. It's something my wife and I talk about often, that you can have two feelings about the same thing, and that's sometimes hard to explain to people. But it's difficult because people are doing great work in and around Maplewood, and the more the city can do to support them is great. And I do have to say, just for a minute, I just want to say to Ms. Alswager, what you do is really important. I am a card-carrying choir nerd. I graduated from high school 25 years ago, and I was in touch with my high school choir director last week, and we are still very close. We get together for coffee often, and I sang with vocal lessons on other folks, and then my son just started with the Minnesota Boy Choir. So he's a choir nerd in training. But that gift of music, and the gift of music not only for the folks that your choirs sing for, but for the kids themselves, and what it does for them is really critical. So I just want to thank you for what you do, because it's personal to me.
Thank you. Councilmember Niblett.
Thank you, Mayor. This is really fun. Just the idea of doing this, of giving away money, is really cool. But
We'll talk to you the next council.
Okay.
Because you're also not giving money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, don't spoil
runs
it.
out
Don't
pretty
spoil
quick.
it yet. I just wanted to make note of a little flip in the short order. Do you know the little order of things, the little descriptions that were given? Weaver and Webster are mixed up.
Okay.
Just FYI.
Can we maybe get a new one sent out?
Yes.
Okay. Because
That
I think
page, is that okay, or do you want the whole thing?
this one.
Oh, it rolls on that one too. Yep, okay.
Make sure that rolls to the minutes.
Yep, okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay. Good, we'll get that corrected. Okay, we have one more agenda item, and it is going to be a lengthy one. And I am going to suggest perhaps a very brief recess, just so that we will all be much more comfortable and we can listen and we don't have to get up and, I'm being honest, okay? That's what it is. So with that, it is 9:06. We're going to take council members, a very short. All right, we'll take a recess. Coleman to introduce this, and then we'll speak with Chief Bondor.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. We have really been working on this for a long time, and the council has been super supportive of the new fire transition to full-time department, and we are really pleased with the completion of that. For your consideration tonight, we're going to ask you to consider the consolidation of fire department operations from 3 to 2 stations. The other thing that we're asking for, and we don't do this very often, so I thought I should explain. We have a motion for you to authorize staff to develop a professional service agreement with Wold Architects and engineers to conduct a fire station needs assessment and design recommendations. And the reason that we've put this on the agenda, first of all, you won't need to act on item B if you don't approve item A. So that's one thing. The other thing, that we're going through this process because it takes a very long time from when we start from design to the feasibility study, and then we hire an architect. And really, we won't be going out for bid on any new building until November, probably. That's if we start the process tonight. So that's why we did that. Normally, we don't make assumptions that council is going to support moving forward, but we really felt that this was something that was timely and that we really needed to prepare for this as a first step tonight, should you choose to do the consolidation. So with that, Mayor, we have Chief Mondor, Chief of EMS, to lead off the presentation. I think there probably are a couple of co-presenters as well.
Chief Mondor.
Yes, Mayor, members of the council, thank you for entertaining us at this late hour. I will have a couple other presenters, Chief Lucan and President of local IAFF 4470, Ray Crawford. Before I kick this over to Chief Lucan, who's going to give a brief historical background, some comments that Commissioner Reinhardt mentioned this evening really resonated with me when she talked about some disappointment over lack of community engagement. And I really hope that we can demonstrate tonight that these decisions, we understand, are difficult, but they're based in data. They've been based in transparency, and more importantly, one of the pillars of our process has truly been community engagement. And with that, I'll give it to Chief Lucan.
Mayor and Council, thank you. So I'm going to just give a quick overview to get us up to about 2016 and Chief Mondor will take it for the recommendations and such that came from the EMS Fire Work Group, which one of those was through the Fitch study, was to commission them to look into the staffing. In 2010, finding and retaining paid-on-call firefighters for each station was becoming very difficult to find. And it was because the city was growing. You had the older part of the cities over the years, the newer part. And so really having trouble getting people who were stable in their homes. And we started seeing more and more of the younger people that we were getting and retaining them and being able to hold on to them longer than 2 and 2.5 years was becoming very difficult in the early parts of 2010. In the beginning of 2010, we started a strategic plan process to look at ways to staff our station using our current paid-on-call firefighters. In the beginning of 2011, we shared our strategic plan with the council and provided them with the following findings. Our findings showed that going to a part-time staffing model, having the paid-on-call firefighters sign up for shift and staff 3 stations around the clock would provide a greater number of firefighters on duty at any given time. We no longer had to find a firefighter that lived within the area of a particular fire station. We could take firefighters from any community, we could take all the paid per call firefighters we have, and they could work at any one of our 3 fire stations that we were going to have at the time, which in turn provided us way better coverage than we currently have. That in turn led us to where the stations needed to be. So after we took a good look, you have to remember some of the stations were built back in the early 80s. Actually, one of the stations, the Gladstone station down there, was built back in the 40s. And we had the Hazelwood station that was built back in the early 70s. So when those stations were built, in the East County Line station down on London Lane, when they were built around where the population was and where the people we could get who were paid per call or volunteers could make it to the station in a reasonable amount of time. So at that point, then, we really took a good look, and we made the determination that, based on moving some stations and closing others, we could provide the same coverage and pretty much provide the exact same response time, if not better, by going down to 3 stations. We had many hours of community engagement. We had meetings at those stations we were going to close, and ultimately it came down to is that we decided to close the London Lane station, and we decided to close the Parkside station. The Parkside station would be covered by Station 3, which is in Hazelwood, and the Gladstone station, and the other one was to do as we did, and we were so grateful to the council at that time for that, was to move the East County Line station that was on was on Century Avenue to where it presently is today on the 3M complex. And it has lived up to the expectations of us having 3 stations. Well, our call volume increased. Our business has gotten busier. The types of calls have gotten different over the years and that, and we are now having, and we did earlier, have really troubles still getting part-time firefighters. Not only was it hard to get them and retain them again, but also other cities were starting to take our model of going to the part-time basis. So now they were stealing from us, we were stealing from them, and you can only use a firefighter so many hours in a day, no matter where they're at. And so it became a pretty significant issue as we went. So in 2016, the Fire and EMS Work Group was commissioned, was put together. Countless hours, great people sat on that committee, and one of their recommendations that they came forth after meetings for so long was to commission the Fitch Group to look at staffing and changes that we needed to look at as we move forward into the thing. At that point then, I'll turn that over to Mike, and then after we're through here, any questions you have, we'd be very happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Lucan. So I'm going to quick go over a background of how we got to today. As Chief Lucan alluded to, in 2016, Council authorized staff to form a fire EMS work group to study service delivery as our models were changing and the demands were changing, and the investment was going to be substantial if we're going to continue to deliver the services that our community has come to expect. That fire EMS work group included 5 citizen representatives, labor and management from public safety, the previous assistant city manager, and was facilitated by a third party. That group established core principles that they desired in the delivery of fire EMS services, which include the desire to ensure excellence in service delivery, the need to provide responsible stewardship of public resources, and that the standard of fairness be applied to those delivering and receiving fire and EMS services. One of the deliverables from that work group was that the fire and EMS department develop a work plan to operationalize the strategic direction of the department. We subsequently developed that work plan, and one of the recommendations from that work plan was to hire a third-party consultant to conduct a fire station location and operational review. As Chief Lucan alluded to, we have successfully transitioned to a full-time staffing model and are extremely satisfied with the results we have. I cannot compliment our staff enough. They're the backbone of our organization without a doubt. That RFQ with Fitch was developed in December of 2016. We reviewed proposals and asked that council approve that recommendation of January 2017, and basically all of 2017 was consumed with data, GIS analysis, interviews with staff, interviews with city officials, all layers of the organization. In January, on January 25th of 2018, Fitch presented their findings to council. There were several recommendations. One of those, which we considered this kind of phase 1 and 1A, well, the primary one was to transition to a full-time staffing model, which we have done. The other big one of several recommendations was to consider realigning the fire station locations or consolidating operations from a 3-station model to a 2-station model. And that report was attached in your packet just for historical reference purposes. Fitch found in their study that the fire department's current performance was 8.3 minutes travel time, so from the time our staff goes en route to on scene, for 90% of the incidents. We use that benchmark, the 90th percentile, because averages can skew things. We can have response times that are excessively long, or they can be right next door, and it doesn't provide necessarily an accurate representation of what our system, how our system is performing. Since transitioning to a full-time staffing model, our response times have remained relatively consistent with our performance in 2016-17, despite an increased call volume, and I think that just speaks to some of the investment that you all have made in our staffing model. Call volumes continue to increase. Fitch at the time projected 5 to 6% per year. In 2017, we saw a 10% increase. In 2018, it went down to 4%. Year to date, we're at 8%. Most of that response is driven by EMS calls. 85% at the time of the study. Over the past 3 years, it fluctuates anywhere from 78 to 88%. So sticking in with those trends, we've been very successful at trying to put ourselves out of business in the fire industry. And we've seen a lot of regulation and kind of stability in fire calls as a result of that. We're trying to do the same thing in EMS. We're just, it's innovative new work that we're trying to figure out. The key finding that I think we should discuss is that when they did the study, if we wanted to maintain that performance, and that was what we asked them to do, is how do we continue to deliver services as we are today and when the study was conducted? If we were to maintain that level of service, the current deployment of resources, meaning having the north and central fire station, was nearly 100% duplicative. So if we want to maintain that 8-minute travel time, 90% of the time, having that capital footprint does not buy us any capacity to respond to incidents any quicker. There's just duplication in the way they're laid out in the community, which I will get into a little bit more here. But the key being that they recommend we move resources from the central fire station to the north fire station. In the study, which is available and included, the summary included in your packet, they look at several different options for how can we continue to deliver service effectively and responsibly, and they can actually drop a pin and say, okay, what if you move the stations here and here, and what if you move the stations here and here, and they went through all of that as part of this process, and I'll be happy to entertain questions about that as we keep going here. When I talked about community engagement being a pillar of our process, I just want to highlight that one of the recommendations on the January 25th, 2018 council meeting was A, to transition to that staffing model, and B, to hold a series of community engagement events at a time that was deemed appropriate by council. We had several outreach opportunities. We used the city newsletter, social media outreach, poll call results, which were included in your packet, posted open houses on every other medium that I just discussed, and had open houses that were lightly attended on June 26th and July 11th. And I think that's the meat of the recommendations. I'll get back to what we're asking for here in a moment. But I do just want to review these couple slides from the recommendations from Fitch and Associates. You can see this model. This is what they're recommending, and the polygons represent an 8-minute travel time. If we were to deploy the stations at the North Station, County Road C in Hazelwood, and the existing South Fire Station, which is at 600 McKnight Road, a northwest corner of 3M campus. Plugging, if you go just south of 36 in the Gladstone neighborhood, continuing to operate out of Station 2, as I said, is over 99% duplicative if we want to maintain this response standard. And as staff, when we look at how are we going to invest our resources, we know that a substantial investment has been made to our staffing model, and we do believe that they're the backbone of our organization. Either way, both stations were in severe need of upgrading. Our administrative offices in the Gladstone neighborhood do not meet our needs. We don't have storage needs. The technology is not there to continue to support our operation. The North Fire Station, which was built in the 1970s, is crumbling. Staff have literally gone without water and had an inability to use bathrooms due to water problems at certain times of the year, air conditioning issues. There's not built-in safety features that would be looked for in any newer station. So difficult decision. We know that even if we continued the way we operate today, it would require millions of dollars in capital investment. And given the results of the study, we do not think that is a wise use of taxpayer dollars. Just to demonstrate, this was one slide I pulled. I know you have access to more in your packet. But they did consider, okay, if you could just wipe the slate clean, where would you put stations? And they plug them in and say, okay, this would be the ideal place, noting that it only buys us 1% of increased performance, which, considering the capital investment that would require, does not, in our opinion, make fiscal sense either. We've had them move those dots all over the place with different ideas and have consistently found that the current location of the North Fire Station and South Fire Station will meet what we're trying to accomplish as an organization. And with that, we would entertain any questions. Actually, I would like Firefighter Crawford to say a couple words before we do that, if that's all right.
Thank you. Firefighter Crawford, welcome.
Mayor, Council, thank you for spending the evening with us. So I'm here representing our local and just have a brief statement on their behalf. To follow the chief's proposal, we are in full support of the next phases of the Fitch & Associate consultant report. Based on those study findings, our department's strategic plan, we support the proposal to build a new North Station, making that transition to reallocate resources up there as well. The transition will help provide better resource management, as stated by Chief Mondor, and also help improve call response. Also, as mentioned, just better living conditions for our members as well. We do spend a third of our life here at the stations, so that would be better in the long run. We also look forward to this opportunity and also progressing with future progress with the Fitch & Associates study as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And with that, I would certainly entertain any questions.
Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I'm sorry about the issues with water and such at the North Fire Station. I might recommend that you contact the city about your landlord in that situation.
Yeah.
In all seriousness, first of all, big kudos to you and Chief Lutkin and others who have very methodically gone through this process. And the level of data and analysis that's done, frankly, for me, makes this decision relatively easy to make, which I always say is a best practice when dealing with a body like this. If you can make our decision easy, it makes the outcomes pretty predictable. One thing I wanted to ask you, so it's my understanding that we have a plan to also add an ambulance as part of this overall plan. Can you talk a little bit as part of that part of the plan?
Yeah, so with the transition to full-time staff, we've been able to increase a body 24 hours a day that's now on the street that wasn't consistently before. And we also are able to staff a standalone engine company with almost 90% regularity. There's some training pieces, but mostly staffed, which did not happen, and that's during the daytime hours, so our busiest hours. So part of this and the Fitch recommendations and all of the studies is to continue to look at options they recommended figuring out how we add bodies to peak load an ambulance, which is our busiest time of day. So certainly, as Mr. Crawford pointed out, and we'll have good faith conversations with understanding that we're dealing with limited resources to continue to live up to what Fitch's recommendations were, and we believe that we're going to need to do that if we're going to continue with this service delivery model for it to be successful, because we're going to continue to see 5, 6, 7, up to 10% increases in call volume, and we're committed to living up to the recommendations of the study.
I do think if our choice is between adding a building and adding a vehicle, I would pick adding a vehicle. Not only because it's less expensive, but also because the building doesn't go to people's houses. The vehicle does, right? Like that is the responding unit. And to me, that's really the critical thing, that we are well equipped to get to where we need to go. And whether it's coming from 2 buildings or 1, to me is, and the numbers support that, moot. So I think in the long run, that seems to be both the right decision as far as operations, as well as, to me, seems like the fiscally responsible decision as well. So nice work, you guys. Look forward to voting for this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sitting up in the council, DS up here, I have learned an awful lot about fire suppression that I never knew. A lot of artificial knowledge about it, but one of the things that stuck with me throughout this entire lengthy process, because I've been here the whole time with Fitch and the EMS group, and moving to a full-time firefighter staffing model, is the fact that the fire service has changed considerably. That my old thinking used to be that we need a lot of fire trucks because the fire department puts out fires. And that was what my focus was, and that was clearly outdated, because I have learned that with fire suppression, and we've got sprinkler systems and fire detectors and all of that, it's changed. But it has changed so significantly to being a focused medical service that we provide that I don't know that necessarily our residents really fully appreciate that. And understand that. That's why, thank you, Councilmember Smith, for bringing up the ambulance point, because in your staffing strategy, you talk about recommending a peak load ambulance from 8 in the morning until 10 at night. Can you talk a little bit more from your perspective? Because you folks sitting out there in the uniforms, you're the experts. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how it's changed?
Yes, Mayor Abrams, I'm biased, but I think that fire-based EMS is the superior delivery model for emergency medical services, that if the community has that option. While fire calls have diminished, we still have an obligation to respond and be prepared and be excellent at response to those incidents, and Chief Conway has done an excellent job along with the training committee, and again, just a truly engaged staff to ensure that they're training constantly, monthly, on shift, off shift, to ensure that they're prepared to respond to high-risk, low-frequency emergencies. That being said, I would put our paramedics against any in the world when it comes to medical response, and they are truly passionate about being advocates for the families and patients that they care for. And they're not here to be paramedics so that they can be firefighters. They're here because they truly enjoy that aspect of the job. And it has changed to that now we're spending 85% of our time responding to medical emergencies. And that's a trend that's nationwide that's going to continue until we can figure out how we're going to start knocking it down with some community risk reduction efforts. But you look at every community in the nation and they're dealing with similar trends. And I highlight that our staff is so well prepared to handle a multitude of emergencies because I think it's important to acknowledge their efforts in that as well.
Sitting up here and being the one that gets to vote on this proposal, what I really appreciate the most is the fact that we have had so much community engagement, but I truly appreciate the fact that we went outside and got a consultant, and we've got all of the data to support this. But really what's moving for me tonight is to see we've got fire administration here. We also have rank and file here that are all in support of this particular proposal. And I think that you folks are the ones that are in charge of keeping our city safe in terms of fire and medical calls. And we really rely on you. And I think that this process really is a testament to how committed you are to our community, that you're bringing this to us. When I was out at the one of the engagement opportunities, the listening sessions that we had over at the Hazelwood station, County Road C in Hazelwood, and I realized I hadn't been in that station since one of my children was a Cub Scout, and they're now, pushing 30. And so I hadn't been in there really, but we did a very nice tour. But we absolutely have to do something. When I walked into that station, I was a little embarrassed that we are using that station. And I would encourage any one of our residents who has a question, go and look at that station, because we need to do something about it, and we need to do it now. And we've got all of the numbers. We have done all of the homework. The experts sitting in the blue uniforms, I think you've done a remarkable job of, I think I would agree, Councilmember Smith, you have made our jobs easy to make this decision, that you are putting us in a position that we will have a sustainable fire service for our community that will be, well, can't be beat, because you folks have done just a fabulous job on presenting this whole thing and working it through. Looking back, we started with Fitch, was it in 2016?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
so
Mayor.
this is a 3-year process coming to this vote. So I just want to note that for a moment, that, let's all appreciate this, that this has been 3 years to bring all of this information together, to bring the staffing model, to bring, everything together for us. And I think this is one of the best things that we can do for our community. You're the experts, and you are 100% telling us that this is what we need to do. And I've read it. I've read everything that you've given us, and you've done an amazing job. So thank you very much. You make my decision easy tonight. Councilmember Neblett.
Thank you, Mayor. Excuse me. Chief Mondor, I just want to say, as a former customer, if you will, of your fire department, I would like to talk about the service the fire department gives. Since I've lived in Maplewood, the fire department has come to my house. The EMS has come to my house twice. First time, to help my mother, who was in her 80s, because she just, after driving from Georgia with my father, that's another story, just collapsed. And staff was there. I don't know. It's kind of funny when I think about people saying, oh, it took them this long to get to us. That was the last thing in the world that I was thinking at the time, is how much time it took. All I knew is they were there pretty quick. The second time, got her to the hospital. She was fine. Second time, my husband, his pacemaker went off 22 times before they got him. But when EMS got there, he felt like he could live. They were still trying to get it, doing whatever it does. But the service that my family has received, bar none.
Thank you.
Bar none. So, thank you. I get all of this, but from a personal level, you guys are doing, I can't even imagine you doing better.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you.
I do not see any other lights. So with that, we have 2 motions in front of us. Do I have a motion? We're looking at page 143.
143.
I move to approve the Finch and Associates and staff recommendations and consolidate fire department operations from 3 to 2 stations.
Second.
Moved by Knutson, seconded by Neblett, the motion to approve Fitch and Associates and staff recommendations to consolidate fire department operations from 3 to 2 stations. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. And the second motion?
I move to authorize staff to develop a professional services agreement with Wold Architects and Engineers to conduct a fire station needs assessment and design recommendations.
Second.
Moved by Smith, seconded by Neblett, the motion to authorize staff to develop a professional services agreement with Wolder Architects and Engineers to conduct a fire station needs assessment and design recommendations. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
The motion passes. Now, congratulations, Fire Department, and now let's go out and get you a new fire station.
Thank you.
All
And
right.
thank you for the support. All staff really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. And with that, we are adjourned.